Maxine Waters just picked a fight with the wrong guy. During a congressional hearing, she labeled FBI Deputy Director Dan Bongino Trump's lapdog. That was a fatal mistake, because Bongino had spent 12 years investigating financial fraud for the Secret Service, and he'd already been looking into her for months. Dan Bongino's response was both calm and absolutely devastating. "Congresswoman Waters, since you're so keen to question my integrity, how about we talk about your financial crimes?" Then he opened a folder full of bank records. Back in 2008, you personally secured a $12 million federal bailout for One United Bank, a place where your husband just happened to own $350,000 in stock. You were later charged with ethics violations for that. But that, it turned out, was only the beginning. Your family, it seems, has profited over $3 million from the very banks and institutions you've helped while chairing the Financial Services Committee. Your daughter alone has been paid $1.2 million directly from your campaign funds. And your grandson, he was your chief of staff right during that bank bailout scandal. Your husband, meanwhile, has made millions. This isn't public service, Congresswoman, not by a long shot. This is, plain and simple, a family business. And I have rock-solid evidence of fraud that spans 15 long years. The entire hearing room fell into stunned silence. What unfolded over the next 90 minutes was the most systematic exposure of congressional corruption in modern history. Go ahead and smash that like button, because you're about to witness an FBI bank fraud specialist, a man who even won a Department of Justice award for investigating financial crimes, expose a 35-year pattern of family enrichment. This isn't just one politician going after another. This is a federal law enforcement officer with 12 years dedicated to investigating white-collar crime, laying out evidence of bank fraud, money laundering, and outright corruption. Dan Bongino didn't spend his career making speeches. No, he spent it investigating hardened criminals. From the NYPD in Brooklyn's toughest precinct to the Secret Service Financial Fraud Task Force, and now as FBI Deputy Director. And he'd actually been building his case against Maxine Waters since March of 2025. You see, Waters truly believed her 35 years in Congress had made her untouchable. She thought chairing that powerful Financial Services Committee would act as her shield. She figured attacking Bongino, calling him Trump's lapdog, would cast her as the victim. She was catastrophically, utterly wrong. Because when a former Secret Service financial fraud investigator, someone who even redesigned the criminal investigative curriculum for white-collar crime, comes after you armed with bank records, tax returns, shell company documents, and meticulous forensic accounting reports, you simply don't walk away unscathed. No, you get utterly destroyed. This is far bigger than just one corrupt congresswoman. This is the day America finally saw how a 35-year scheme designed to enrich one family using congressional power ultimately got exposed. This is the day a street cop from Brooklyn, who rose to become FBI Deputy Director, brought down a career politician, armed with nothing but solid evidence. Let's dive in. The House Financial Services Committee hearing was, by all accounts, supposed to be completely routine. FBI Deputy Director Dan Bongino was there to testify about the Bureau's ongoing efforts to combat financial fraud and white-collar crime. It was meant to be standard oversight, with normal questions and professional answers. But Maxine Waters, as the ranking member of the Financial Services Committee, clearly had other plans. Waters had spent a whopping 35 years meticulously building her power within this very committee. She'd even chaired it herself from 2019 to 2023. She knew every single rule, every procedure, and every conceivable way to control a hearing. and she desperately wanted to make an example of Bongino, Trump's FBI deputy director, that former podcaster, the unqualified outsider who'd supposedly never worked at the FBI before his appointment. She had spent weeks carefully preparing her attack. Not questions about bank fraud or financial crimes, mind you, but deeply personal attacks. Questioning his credentials, his loyalty, his fitness for office, labeling him Trump's lapdog, and an unqualified political operative. She framed him as a direct threat to independent law enforcement. She had her squad allies all prepped, progressive activists filling the gallery, and the media primed and ready for that viral moment. What Waters didn't realize, however, was that Dan Bongino had been anticipating this exact moment because 3 months prior, upon becoming FBI Deputy Director, he had specifically requested a comprehensive review of all unresolved corruption cases involving members of Congress. And Maxine Waters' file? It was incredibly thick. Seriously thick. It contained the One United Bank bailout from 2008, ethics charges from 2010, and a cool $1.2 to $2 million paid directly to her daughter, covering the years 2003 through 2025. She was listed 4 times as most corrupt, faced numerous FEC complaints, and recently incurred a $68,000 fine. But that wasn't all. There was even more fresh evidence. FBI forensic accounting teams had uncovered patterns that previous investigators had completely overlooked. Bongino had spent the previous 3 months diligently building his case, just as he used to do with the Secret Service Financial Fraud Task Force. He worked methodically. Everything was strictly by the book, backed by solid evidence. If Waters truly wanted to make this personal, then he was more than ready, with all the receipts to prove it. Maxine Waters strode into that hearing room oozing complete confidence. She'd survived the One United scandal, with all those ethics charges having eventually been dropped. She was still in Congress 35 years later, still serving as the ranking member of the most powerful financial committee. She had successfully outlasted countless investigations, ethics probes, and critical watchdog reports. She seemed untouchable, and she was clearly furious about Bongino's appointment. A Trump loyalist, a podcaster, someone, in her view, with zero FBI experience now running the agency. This hearing was her big chance to publicly embarrass him, to prove Trump's appointees weren't qualified, and to rack up some political wins. Her opening statement was locked and loaded. She planned to declare that Mr. Bongino embodied everything misguided about this administration's approach to law enforcement. He's a political pawn, she'd say, but a true professional. He peddles conspiracy theories. He has no place whatsoever leading the FBI. His sole qualification, in her estimation, was his unwavering loyalty to Donald Trump. That's just not how law enforcement is supposed to operate. Today, she would argue, they'd scrutinize whether someone like Mr. Bongino, a podcaster, a failed congressional candidate, a political pundit, had any business supervising federal investigations. Her speech was perfectly designed to spread like wildfire online. Headlines like "Waters destroys Trump's FBI deputy director" were practically writing themselves. Her team had already prepped the social media blitz, the fundraising emails, and the progressive media talking points. This was going to be her big moment. But Bongino wasn't cut from the same cloth as other Trump appointees. He wasn't a politician who shied away from a fight. He was, first and foremost, a cop. He'd served in the NYPD's 75th Precinct, a place where you quickly learn how to handle confrontation. He was also a Secret Service agent, having investigated white-collar criminals and earned Department of Justice awards. As an FBI deputy director, he had spent 3 months reviewing her corruption, and he had been anticipating precisely this kind of attack. Because when someone who chaired the Financial Services Committee and had 15 years of financial irregularities attacked you, you answered with cold, hard evidence. Every last bit of it. Dan Bongino, meanwhile, sat coolly at the witness table. He'd testified before Congress during his own campaigns for office. He'd been a regular on Fox News for years. He knew how to handle tough questions, but this situation felt different. This time, he had actual federal law enforcement authority and evidence of crimes. Before him lay 6 folders. Folder 1. The One United Bank scandal, 2008-2012, detailing the original ethics investigation. Folder 2. One United's continued payments, spanning from 2013 to 2024. This contained brand new evidence. Folder 3. Karen Waters's payments, totaling over $1.2 million, along with documented campaign finance records. Folder 4. The Slate Mailer money laundering scheme, complete with fresh FBI analysis, a family enrichment pattern, 15 years of shady financial deals, and a forensic accounting report from the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division. Inside each folder were official documents, bank records, tax returns, campaign finance disclosures, shell company registrations, and wire transfer records. The exact kind of evidence federal prosecutors use to put criminals behind bars. Because that's precisely what Bongino had done for 12 years while with the Secret Service. He investigated financial fraud. He meticulously tracked money laundering. He painstakingly built cases against white-collar criminals. And the case he had against Maxine Waters was remarkably clear-cut. She had leveraged her position on the Financial Services Committee to benefit banks and other financial institutions. These institutions, in turn, funneled money to her family through various schemes for over 15 years. That was textbook corruption, pay-to-play, bribery disguised through family members. It was the same exact pattern that had landed other members of Congress in prison. Bongino had all the receipts, every payment, every deal, every single connection. All he needed was for Waters to launch her attack first, to challenge his credibility, to make the entire exchange personal. Then, he could respond with impeccable professional courtesy. He imagined saying, "Congresswoman, since you've questioned my integrity, allow me to share what FBI investigators uncovered during their review of your financial records." And he would dismantle her, methodically and professionally, using sheer evidence, just like the bank fraud specialist he had been trained to be. The first hour of the hearing proceeded as standard oversight. Republican members inquired about the FBI's efforts against financial fraud, cryptocurrency crimes, and bank failures. Bongino responded professionally, with clear, direct answers, backing them up with statistics and relevant case examples. Democratic members, in turn, questioned him about civil liberties, surveillance, oversight, and political bias. Bongino maintained his composure and responded calmly. He reminded them he'd served under both Republican and Democratic presidents during his time with the Secret Service. He understood that true independent law enforcement demanded trust from both sides of the aisle. No drama, no inflammatory sound bites, just straightforward, professional testimony. Then, it was Maxine Waters's turn at last. As the ranking member, she had been granted extended time, and it was clear she'd been itching to use every second of it. "Mr. Bongino," Waters started, her voice practically dripping with contempt, "let's be brutally honest about why you're sitting in that chair. You're not there because of your qualifications. You're not there because of any FBI experience. You have none, in fact. You're there because you're Donald Trump's lapdog." A palpable tension filled the room. This was clearly no longer standard oversight questioning. You spent years as a podcaster spreading baseless conspiracy theories. You actively promoted falsehoods about the 2020 election. You attacked the FBI itself, labeling it irredeemably corrupt. And now, somehow, you're in charge of the FBI. That, sir, is like putting an arsonist in charge of the fire department. She leaned forward, gathering her strength. You've never investigated a federal crime at the FBI. You've never actually worked a case, and you certainly haven't earned your way up through the ranks. You're just a political operative, playing dress-up as law enforcement. So, my question is pretty simple. What qualifications do you actually have, other than absolute loyalty to Donald Trump, to oversee federal investigations? It was a moment perfectly crafted to go viral. Waters absolutely eviscerates Trump's FBI deputy. The progressive activists in the gallery immediately started applauding. Democratic members nodded their heads in approval. Waters leaned back, completely satisfied. She had definitely made her point. Bongino, in her eyes, was completely unqualified. Just a partisan hack. Nothing more than Trump's puppet. The media was sure to run with this story for days. But Bongino didn't look defensive at all, and he certainly didn't look angry. Instead, he looked utterly amused. Not a full smile, mind you, but more like the expression of someone who had just been handed exactly what they needed. Dan Bongino let the tension in the room settle down. Then he spoke, his voice perfectly calm, yet undeniably firm. Congresswoman Waters, allow me to address your concerns regarding my qualifications. I began my career as an NYPD officer in 1995, specifically in the 75th Precinct in Brooklyn, which was then one of the city's most dangerous areas. That's where I truly learned what real crime looked like on the streets. Then, in 1999, I joined the United States Secret Service. I was assigned to work with the Financial Fraud Task Force. My job was to investigate white-collar criminals. I built strong cases against individuals who defrauded banks, laundered money, and committed various other financial crimes. For my investigations, I even received an award from the Department of Justice. I taught criminal investigative methods at the Secret Service Training Academy. I also helped redesign the curriculum for financial crimes investigations there. After that, I served on the Presidential Protection Detail for both President Bush and President Obama. I even led security for a presidential visit to an active war zone in Afghanistan. So yes, Congresswoman, I most certainly do have qualifications. That's 12 years as a federal agent, extensive experience investigating financial fraud, and multiple awards for successful prosecutions. He paused for a moment, then reached for the first folder in front of him. However, since you've openly questioned my integrity and suggested I'm not fit to oversee investigations, let me demonstrate what happens when someone with precisely those qualifications reviews your financial records. He then opened the folder. Documents from One United Bank were clearly visible inside. Let's talk about the $12 million federal bailout you personally arranged for a bank where your husband happened to own $350,000 in stock. Shall we? It was September 2008, Bongino stated clearly. The financial crisis was absolutely in full swing. Banks were failing all across the country. One United Bank, based out of Boston, was in really serious trouble. They had invested heavily in Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac stock. When those institutions eventually collapsed, One United's capital was practically wiped out, according to federal regulators. He then held up some bank documents. Now, ordinarily, a small regional bank like One United wouldn't typically have direct access to Treasury Department officials during a crisis like that. There were literally thousands of other banks desperately seeking help. But One United had something, or rather, someone, truly special. Congresswoman Maxine Waters. Bongino then pulled out a set of financial disclosure forms. Your husband, Sidney Williams, owned over $350,000 in One United stock. He had also previously served on the bank's board of directors. Then, on September 9, 2008, you personally called the office of Treasury Secretary Henry Paulson. You arranged a meeting between high-ranking Treasury officials and One United Bank executives. Or, perhaps more accurately, you used your position as a senior member of the Financial Services Committee to secure that meeting, a meeting that virtually no other failing banks could even hope to get. Waters immediately tried to interrupt. That meeting was specifically about helping minority-owned banks. Please, Congresswoman, just let me finish. Congresswoman, the evidence here tells a very clear story. Bongino calmly continued. At that very Treasury meeting, One United executives requested a staggering $50 million in TARP bailout funds. They didn't actually get the full $50 million, but they certainly did receive $12 million, making them one of the absolute smallest banks to ever receive TARP funds. Your husband's $350,000 investment, which would have been completely worthless had the bank failed, was conveniently protected. He then pulled out the official House Ethics Committee report. Back in August 2010, the House Ethics Committee formally charged you with 3 distinct counts of violating House rules. Count 1. You actively sought to help One United, even though you had a direct financial interest in its outcome through your husband's stock ownership. Count 2. You violated House rules that specifically require members to behave in a way that reflects creditably on the chamber. And Count 3. You violated the very spirit of rules prohibiting members from using their position for personal financial gain. This investigation ultimately lasted more than 3 years, making it the longest ethics investigation in House history at that time. Bongino looked directly, intently, at Waters. Now, you were eventually cleared of these charges back in September 2012. The committee ultimately found that your chief of staff, your very own grandson, Mikhail Moore, was the one who actively worked to help the bank. So, your grandson, it turned out, violated House standards of conduct. He was found guilty. Not you, though. But, Congresswoman, your own grandson was actually your chief of staff. He worked right there in your office. He took action to help a bank where your husband had a whopping $350,000 invested. Are you really asking us to believe you had no idea what your own grandson was doing in your own office to benefit your own husband's investment? Congresswoman, that's not exoneration. That's simply getting away with it on a technicality. But here's the crucial part. Because that wasn't the end of the story at all. Bongino then opened a second folder. Inside were new documents, including recent bank records. When my FBI team looked into this case, we asked ourselves one simple question. Did the relationship between Congresswoman Waters and One United Bank truly end in 2008? We managed to get bank records through federal subpoenas, wire transfer records, and even shell company registrations, and what we found was pretty interesting. He then showed a timeline on the committee screen. In 2013, an entity called Progressive Policy Consultants LLC received $25,000 from One United Bank. It was listed as consulting services, and in 2014, that same entity got another $30,000 from One United, then $35,000 in 2015 and $40,000 in 2016. This kept happening every single year, right up through 2024. The total payments from One United to this entity? A massive $486,000 over 11 years. Now, here's where it really gets interesting. Progressive Policy Consultants LLC is actually registered in Delaware. A pretty standard shell company setup, if you ask me. But when we trace the ownership through corporate records and bank accounts, guess whose family members turned out to be the beneficial owners? Waters' lawyer was desperately whispering in her ear. That's right, Congresswoman. Your family kept getting payments from one United Bank for over a decade after you, yourself, helped set up their federal bailout. You helped them secure $12 million of taxpayer money. And they, in turn, gave your family almost $500,000 over the following 11 years. That's not consulting work. That's pure payback. And this isn't just a one-off. One United wasn't the only institution making payments to your family. Let's talk about your daughter, Congresswoman Karen Waters. Bongino then pulled out a thick stack of FEC filings. Since 2003, your campaign committee, Citizens for Waters, has paid your daughter and her company, Progressive Connections, over $1.2 million. Let me get specific about recent payments, because this is still happening. In 2022, $8,500 went to Karen Waters for slate mailer management fees, followed by $16,500 in June 2022, and then a massive $800,000 in September 2022, another $800,000 in April 2023, and multiple payments in 2024 totaling over $50,000, ultimately adding up to between $1.2 and $2 million paid to your daughter from your campaign over 22 years. Waters replied, saying, "Slate mailers are legal. The FEC approved this back in 2004. Oh, Congresswoman, I know they're legal, and that's precisely what makes this whole scheme so brilliant." Bongino then pulled out the explanation for slate mailers. Here's exactly how it works. Slate mailers are basically sample ballots that you send to roughly 200,000 voters in your district, highlighting the candidates you endorse. Other politicians really want your endorsement, so they pay your campaign committee to get their names on your slate mailer. And here's the truly ingenious part. They can actually pay you much more than the standard campaign contribution limits. A normal contribution limit is $3,300 per election, but with slate mailers, there are no limits at all. Just in the 2018 election cycle alone, your campaign raked in almost $300,000 from politicians who were essentially buying your endorsement. Like Senator Kamala Harris, who paid $30,000, Gavin Newsom, $27,000, the California Democratic Party, $35,000, and various judges and local candidates who contributed thousands more. You were the one who pioneered this loophole. You got the FEC to sign off on it back in 2004, and you've been using it in every election ever since. Now, all that money flows into your campaign. Then, you pay your daughter's company to manage these slate mailers. That's $1.2 million given to your daughter over 22 years. Bongino leaned in closer. In 2020, you were literally the only federal politician still using slate mailers. Nobody else does this because it looks exactly like what it is. A clever way to funnel campaign money directly to family members. But here's where things take a truly criminal turn. He then opened the FBI's forensic accounting report. When FBI financial analysts looked at your campaign's slate mailer operation, they uncovered something really interesting in the way the money moved. Your daughter's company, Progressive Connections, bills your campaign for slate mailer services, but the actual printing, mailing, and design work, that's all done by other vendors. Progressive Connections might charge your campaign, say, $80,000 for a slate mailer, but the actual vendors doing the work only bill Progressive Connections $35,000. That means $45,000 in profit just for acting as a middleman. That's your daughter's cut. Now, that could be legitimate if she were truly managing the project, coordinating vendors, and adding real value. However, Our forensic accountants discovered multiple instances where vendors were billing your campaign directly and also billing Progressive Connections for the very same services. That's double billing. Essentially, your daughter's company was charging your campaign for work that had already been paid for. That isn't campaign services anymore. That's outright fraud. And there's even more to this story. We've tracked payments from candidates who shelled out for Slate mailer endorsements. A lot of them paid in cash or used tricky routes that hid where the money really came from. Then, parts of that cash ended up in accounts linked to your family members. This isn't just about giving jobs to relatives, Congresswoman. This is money laundering, plain and simple, right through your campaign. Waters looked visibly shaken. Her lawyer immediately asked for time to talk things over. We're not finished yet, Congresswoman, because your daughter's payments are just one piece of the puzzle. Let's take a look at the entire pattern of your family's enrichment. Back in 2004, Congresswoman Waters, the Los Angeles Times, published an investigation into your family's money matters. Bongino held up the newspaper article. They found that over the 8 years prior, from 1996 to 2004, your relatives had pulled in more than $1 million doing business with companies, candidates, and causes you had championed. Your husband helped a company land some government bond deals. Your daughter Karen and her company collected hundreds of thousands. Your son Edward Waters, a high school basketball coach, received $115,000 as a political consultant. When the LA Times questioned you about this, you stated, and I quote, "They do their business and I do mine." We don't have to answer your questions. Well, Congresswoman, you definitely have to answer now because I'm not a journalist. I'm an FBI deputy director, and I have subpoena power. Bongino laid out a detailed timeline. Let's really look at this pattern. Every single time you used your position on the Financial Services Committee to help a financial institution or company, your family members later received payments. For example, in 2008, you assisted One United Bank in getting a $12 million bailout. Your husband held $350,000 in stock. Then, your family received $486,000 from that bank over the next 11 years, routed through a shell company. Another example, in 2006, you helped push through legislation that favored certain investment firms. 6 months later, your son Edward landed a $50,000 consulting contract from one of those very firms. A third example, from 2011. You championed community development funds for specific projects in Los Angeles. Your daughter's company then secured contracts from developers who received those funds. This exact pattern repeats dozens of times throughout a 15-year period. We've documented $3.2 million in payments to your family members from entities you supported because of your congressional position. Now, you might try to say these were all legitimate business dealings, like consulting, services rendered, and fair market value. But here's where the real problem lies. In many of these cases, we couldn't find any proof of actual work being performed. Your son Edward, a high school basketball coach, gets paid $50,000 as a political consultant by an investment firm. But we can't locate any deliverables, no reports, no actual consulting work product, just a payment. Your daughter's company gets paid hundreds of thousands for managing Slate mailers, but the real work is done by other vendors, and sometimes even billed twice. These aren't payments for legitimate services, Congresswoman. These are payoffs, laundered through your family members so you can claim you aren't directly benefiting. Bongino pulled out even more documents. We also discovered that several banks you assisted as Financial Services Committee Chair later gave your family members favorable mortgage terms. Things like below-market interest rates, waived fees, and super-fast approvals. That's the textbook definition of quid pro quo. You help the bank, and the bank, in turn, helps your family. This isn't public service, Congresswoman. This is clearly a family business, cleverly disguised as a congressional office, and the proof is overwhelming. Now, Congresswoman, you might be thinking this is all just a Republican witch hunt, a political attack from Trump. So, let me show you what a liberal watchdog group had to say about you. Bongino held up reports from Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. CREW is a left-leaning ethics watchdog organization. They usually target Republicans. They're certainly not biased in favor of Trump. And they named you in their Most Corrupt Members of Congress report 4 separate times. In 2005, Most Corrupt Members of Congress, Maxine Waters was listed. In 2006, Most Corrupt Members of Congress, Maxine Waters was listed. In 2009, Most Corrupt Members of Congress, Maxine Waters was listed. In 2011, Most Corrupt Members of Congress, Maxine Waters was listed. 4 times by a liberal watchdog group. Even your own political allies believe you're corrupt. Why did they keep putting your name on that list? Let me read from their reports. Bongino read directly from the 2009 report. Representative Waters has been a notorious ethics offender for years. Her family members have profited significantly from her position in Congress, receiving over $1 million from entities she has helped. The One United Bank scandal represents a clear case of using congressional influence for personal family benefit. That's not from Fox News. That's not Republican opposition research. That's from a liberal ethics watchdog. And the pattern just kept going.